Never give up. You're about to listen to the Darla Z, live from the Hollywood Room on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio. Award-winning singer-songwriter Darla Z brings you her special guests who share intimate stories about their lives, how they became successful in their chosen fields, how they learned from their mistakes, and how we can all make a positive difference in the lives of others. Welcome to Live from the Hollywood Room with your host, Darla Z.
Hi, this is Darla Z coming to you live from the Hollywood Room, and I've got an incredible man on this show. His name is Michael Freeman. He is a Grammy Award-winning producer. He's got 4 Grammy nominations under his belt. He's been doing this since the 1970s, and I'm just super excited to have him on the show. Welcome, 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 Michael.
Well, thank you, Darla. I really appreciate you inviting me on the show. I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you, and I hear an accent. Where does that come from?
Originally from London, England.
Oh, well, see, I'm just going to have to keep talking and talking because I love the accent.
I always tease people and say I'm from London, Ohio, but
well, you've got it down. That's for sure. So I'm just very interested in your whole history because it's pretty extensive. Over 300 albums you've produced or engineered, and you're an expert. You teach master classes in recording, and so I'm just going to dive in deep and start at the beginning. I wonder, how did you get to America and why?
well, it's a long story. I'll try and keep it as short but as concise as I can. When I was 12 years old, my father was headhunted, and we lived in Dallas, Texas, for 2 years. And he was involved in a company that was supplying components for the space program. The Beatles were invading, and I heard blues for the first time. So it was kind of a heady time. And we arrived there in the April after President Kennedy was assassinated, so that was still in the air. It was a very interesting time. But I took up bass guitar, having been told not to take up drumming. Thank you, dear son. And my teacher would take me to an obscure record store on the edge of Dallas and find boxes of what was then known as race records. And he said, "You don't forget the Beatles, forget the pop stuff. You need to learn this." And so he gave me quite a basic education in Texas blues. And just that form. And it must have stuck with me because when we went back to England, the British blues boom was starting. And friends and I were going to see the likes of Fleetwood Mac and Savoy Brown and Jethro Tull in the clubs in London before they actually became national acts that soared to greatness. Music was just a great big part of my life as a teenager. We devoured 6 different music magazines, newspapers that were out weekly in London. So you learned lots about the musicians, the bands, where they came from, what their roots were, and we followed it religiously. And of course, we were out at the weekends going to see bands at various gigs.
When you say we, are you talking about your father and you?
No. He had nothing to do with music. My mother was musical.
Okay.
My father wasn't.
Okay. All right. So your friends and you would all cruise around checking things out.
Yeah, Dad was a physicist, and my mother was the pianist. So I got the technical side from him and the musical side from my mother. But as I say, music was a great part of spare time when you weren't at school or college. And the first recording studio I ever went into was Abbey Road. And
oh, wow.
London had, and I think still does, have summer concerts in Hyde Park that are free. And there was a particular band there that announced to the audience that they were going to make a recording at a North London studio, and would some people come along and sing backups for them. So we found out where it was, and Abbey Road didn't mean too much to me at that point, other than a lot of famous artists recorded there. And so we arrived there and were in Studio 2, the Beatles studio, and got up and sang background vocals for these guys. And I thought, wow, that's great fun. Never thought at the time that I was going to get into a career there. And later, another friend had an acquaintance who was Joe Cocker's live engineer for the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour, and he had settled in at Basing Street Studios, which was owned by Ireland. And we went down there at night and would just sit quietly in a corner and watch some of the recording sessions go on. And I found that
wow.
very interesting. But again, was
so
not.
You sat in on Joe Cocker's recording
No.
sessions?
His engineer, the engineer
Oh,
at the
that's
studio
awesome.
was Joe Cocker's engineer. I later met Joe in Chicago. Now, that's another story. So let's see. Some friends introduced me to two musicians who'd come from Chicago to look for a British bass player. And we met at a Peter Frampton's Camel Humble Pie concert and just became friends. And we'd hang out together at the weekends. I was working for the precursor of British Airways, which was then known as BOAC, and it was in their reservations department. And one day we'd been out in an evening, and the guy said, well, you should come to America. And I said, well, I don't have a job. What would I do? And they said, well, we'd like you to manage us. I went, oh, that's an interesting thought. Maybe it's time for an adventure. So this was New Year's of 1972, and in summer of 73, I used some of my travel concessions and hopped on a plane to Dallas to see an old friend there, and then into Chicago to see these guys who were playing at a big outdoor festival. I thought this was absolutely manna from heaven. And so in November of 1973, I jumped on a plane and came to Chicago with the bass player that they had found. Nobody warned us that it was the North Pole in November. So we got quite a shock. Anyway, the band were not what they professed to be, and they broke up the next year in April. So undeterred, I went out and went to work for another band in Chicago who were called Pez Band, like the candy, Pez Band. And they were the group that coined the genre power pop. They had in a couple of years down the road, they had a label who would give us power pop stickers to wrap around Coke cans. And that was the promo for the band. But they were the
So when you said you worked with them, what did you do in that capacity?
I was their road manager.
Okay.
And so it would always be my fault if anything happened. And that was good. That was good grounding for the future. But they were the darlings of the Chicago club scene. And at that time in Chicago, the bands were earning a great living. There were more clubs than you could think of to go and see bands at the weekend. And it was kind of exciting time.
Yeah,
I got a little tired.
How old were you at this time? How old were you?
See, I arrived in Chicago in 1973. I was 21.
Oh gosh, you were having fun.
Oh yeah. And I thought I'd have a 2-year adventure and then probably go back to the UK and so on and so forth. Well, the adventure continues. And I left being on the road with them. I can't remember quite how long I was with them, but we had it seemed like they'd run their course a little bit. And I left and started publishing a music newspaper in Chicago called Stage Pass. And it was a monthly newspaper because Chicago really didn't have very much journalism, music journalism at the time. There was the Illinois Entertainer and Triad. And it was quite successful for a while, but then I had to go back to the UK for some personal reasons and family things that were going on. So I shut the paper down and didn't think I was going to be coming back. Well, about 3 months after I got back to a very recession-ridden Britain, Pez Band called and they'd been signed and they said, we want you to come back and run our tour. So they flew me back to New York and they were based in, their management was in New York and they were living across the river in New Jersey. And we went out on the road and were opening for Fleetwood Mac and Supertramp and a lot of the big acts. So I saw that side of the business during the 9 or 10 months I was with them. Their fortunes waned again. And I ended up back in Chicago, and went to see two guys who had opened a fledgling studio complex in the Chicago suburbs. It was called Hedden West. Gary Hedden was one of the partners. And I used to hang out there when I was publishing the paper, and they advertised in the paper, and they had become friends. I went to see them. They said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, it looks like I'm going back to London." And they said, "No, we'd like you to come and run our studios as the studio manager." And
Wow.
said, "Okay." I think the minute I had been hired and I walked into the studio, the light bulb went on, and I realized that that's what I really wanted to do. And I was there for 10 years. It was a successful studio. And the owners had a parting of the ways, and the remaining owner decided after a while that he didn't want to be in the studio business anymore. And a lot of the studio's business had been demos, and of course people were doing that at home now. So the business changed. We closed down one of the two rooms. We had a vinyl disc mastering room, and that was going great guns for a while. And then finally he said, "No, I'm out of this," and we were all left to our own devices. And so I went out as a freelance producer engineer and never looked back. And here we are all these
Wow.
years later. And that was 1986. And I was quite well known in the Chicago area because of the work I'd done at the studio, and I had my own clientele there. So I went out as a freelance producer engineer. And
And you've got your own studio now, right? The Blue Point.
no, I don't have my own studio. I have Ears Will Travel. And I work all over the place. And in fact, the last record that I was working on at the end of the year, we did recordings in Memphis and Austin and Chicago. So it's great
Oh,
to be able to
wow.
travel to different cities and work in different environments with some really great musicians.
I need to get you to come to Vegas when I do my next song.
I'd
That'd
be
be
happy to.
awesome.
I'd be happy to.
That would be great. I've been recording at UNLV since
Okay.
2007, I think, and that's just my go-to. But I would love to have you. I'd be honored to have you come in and produce one of my songs. That'd be awesome.
It'd be great. I'd love to do that. You
Okay,
know,
cool.
you probably saw from the discography I sent you that there's a big stack of blues recordings, and
Yes.
blues found me. I didn't find it. I was the pop guy at the studio for a long time, and rock guy, and just doing a lot of different types of recording that weren't. I'd done a couple of blues albums, but it wasn't a big thing. Well, a label called me, and they were in the middle of a record for an artist named Joanna Connor, and their engineer was sick, and he'd recommended that I take over the project. So I did. Very sadly, dear Mike Rasfeld passed away before the record was finished, and that led to me doing all the Chicago work for Blind Pig Records, and I think that ended up being 25 or 26 albums for them alone. And of course,
Wow.
that that translated into other work for other blues artists. And this last album that I've made, which will be
The
coming out.
children's one?
Sorry?
Oh, no, the children's one that you got the nomination for?
No, no.
A
This
new
is
one?
it's the group called Mississippi Heat. And it's the seventh
Okay.
album I've done for them, and it's the 75th blues album that I've been involved
Wow.
in one capacity or another. So it's been
I'm glad you brought up blues. What were you going to say? I don't want to interrupt
no,
you.
no, it was fine. I'm finished.
Okay, so um, excuse me, my nose itched, and that's going to be edited out.
Oh,
But so my producer of the radio show, Paul Jones is his name, and he's a huge blues fan. And I don't know much about blues. So I wanted to ask you some very basic questions for our audience to understand that genre. I would like to understand it better. So my first question is I have heard that there are just a set few chords that belong in a blues song. Is that true?
for the most part, it's a 1-4-5 chord structure, 12 bar blues. Um, uh, and there are some variations on that. There are some guys that just stay on the one chord, and but have this vocal delivery or the feeling to the track that would certainly put itself in that paradigm. There are many different styles of blues. There's the Chicago style, there's a Memphis style, there's country blues, there's hill country blues.
You mentioned Texas
And
blues,
Texas
right?
blues, yes, yeah, and they all
So
have very
what's the difference? And just give me generally the top ones.
maybe the stories, the
Okay.
instrumentation, the delivery. Um, it can get quite subtle. Um, but it's a fascinating genre because, as the great Willie Dixon said, um, blues is the root, the rest is the fruit. And the majority of popular music can trace its roots back to blues in some way, shape, or form.
I am a huge fan of blues. I think. I mean, like if I were to go back, because I like more like the 30s, 40s, 50s music, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So I'd say, Etta James, is that blues?
Sure, it's
Okay.
blues and it's soul. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. I love Etta James. She was a wonderful vocalist.
Oh, wonderful. I totally agree with you. What do you think, since you have gotten amazing awards for your blues contributions as producer and engineer and recording artist, recording person? How would
Recording
you
artist.
classify recording artist?
Yeah.
Okay, as a recording artist, what would you say makes the perfect blues song? What
Oh,
component? Is it the
that's a tough.
lyric? Is it the guitar? Is it, what is it that you hear it and you think, oh my gosh, that's like awesome.
It's the story, and it's the, for lack of a better word, the musical accompaniment that supports that. So, when I'm working in the studio, the objective look at what I'm doing and what the artists are doing is to say, you don't matter and I don't matter, but we're here to serve the song. What's the composition? What is it trying to say? What is it trying to get across to an audience? What's the emotional content behind that? And how do we deliver that? How do we arrange it? What's the instrumentation? Um, the original blues artists were singing from a very deep place, and sometimes in code that you and I would not understand because it was part of their culture. But it was something that was really, it came from a very deep place inside. And I think that's why a lot of people are so attracted to it. And of course, you see that in soul music as well. And the two are intertwined sometimes in many ways. Um, but you find that different guitar players, for instance, have different tonal qualities and different phrases that are very personal to them. Somebody I can think of immediately is Albert King. Albert played very few notes, but it was a style and it was a conversation that he was having that was supporting his vocal. And yeah, blues is actually a lot more intricate than people think. And when you really start getting into it, it's an amazing genre to get to know. It really is. I was involved with the Blues Foundation for many years, and
Mhm.
was the chairman of the board for a season. And I was able to interact with a lot of the spectacular blues musicians that we have out there through the foundation and through some of the events. And you realize how much a part of the culture in the South, and it's spread out across the country, blues really is. We find it everywhere. It's everywhere if you
Mhm.
look for it.
What would you say, if you can, because you've done so many songs, but you've also heard a lot of music, what would you say is your favorite blues recording and why?
Hmm, that's a really tough question to answer.
You want
Um,
to come back to it?
yeah, the first blues recordings I heard were in Texas. There's Lightning Hopkins and some of the other Texas bluesmen. And that translated into, we used to listen to a lot of radio in the UK. Sundays were radio days. There was a comedy show that was sort of a precursor of Monty Python called I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again. And then it was followed by a DJ named John Peel, who played every imaginable kind of music you can think of. It was just an assortment for several hours, which was quite an education. And after that was an R&B and blues show with a DJ named Mike Raven. And that was sort of required listening. He would give money to sailors that were leaving out of the British ports to America to bring back blues and soul and R&B records that he could play on his show. And these were records that we couldn't get in the UK. So that was fascinating. I loved some of the early country blues that I heard. Leroy Carr and Scrapper Blackwell. Of course, Muddy, Willie Dixon. Those were classics. And I had, when I was, one of the things that I did after I'd stopped working for Pez Band was publish a music newspaper, as I told you. And one of the advertisers was a company that managed Willie Dixon, Mighty Joe Young. Who else did they manage? Muddy Waters. And I remember going over to their offices in LaGrange, Illinois, and Willie Dixon opened the door and answered the door. Mighty Joe Young was in there. And then the manager said to me, have you got anything to do right now? And I said, no. He said, well, grab your bag. I've got an errand to run. Come with me. And so we went out into the western suburbs of Chicago and ended up in Westmont. And the light bulb was starting to go on a little bit. And we drove up outside a very modest house, and two young African Americans came running out and said, Uncle Scott, he's waiting for you. He's waiting for you. Well, that was probably Mercy Morganfield and and her brother, Joseph Morganfield. And we walked into this house, and there was Muddy Waters sitting at the kitchen table with a honey ham on one side of the board and a glass of champagne in front of him. And his manager looked at me and said, here's your interview, Merry Christmas. This was 2 days before Christmas. And I sort of stammered through the interview that I recorded. And it was completely in awe. I had no idea that this was going to happen. And when I turned off the tape recorder, that's when I got the interview. And we talked for many hours. And he kept in touch with me for a little while. And when he was playing at venues that I could get to, he used to call me English. He'd say, English, I'm playing here, I'm playing there. And if I could go, I did, and went to see him. And then his fortunes started to soar, and we lost touch after that. But ironically, I ended up working with his son, Joseph. And sadly, Joseph passed away a couple of years ago. But we had made a couple of recordings and were hoping to make another, and of course that didn't get finished. But it was real serendipity for that to happen. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing, really amazing. Would you say, back to the creation of a blues song, would you say that the lyric has to be sad, or can you create a blues song that's funny?
Oh, some of them have great humor in them, and secretly so sometimes. The blues musicians had had their own language, if you like. I did quite a lot of work with Pinetop Perkins, who was Muddy's piano player, and Willie Smith, his drummer. And I can remember we were recording tracks in Austin, Texas, and the two of them were sitting outside, and it was as if they had an entirely different language. And it was fascinating to listen to them. They became really good friends for me, and it was a joy to work with them. It really was. But yeah, that was pretty special.
That's cool because you think, I mean, just by the name of itself, the blues, you think that um it would have to be about the blues, and would you say Sinatra's song Quarter to Three? There's nothing but the place, just you and me. Would you say that's a blues song?
Mm,
Or more like
I
what did he
wouldn't,
call him?
I wouldn't say it was a blues song. I mean, the blues is a feeling. And blues can be happy, blues can be sad. I'd say that some of the songs that Sinatra was singing were standards or became
Yes.
standards. But they still
Saloon song. I think that's what he called it. Frank calls it a saloon song.
saloon song, yeah. Yeah.
So saloon songs are not the blues.
Oh, they can be, I think. I think they can have blues elements in them for sure. For sure.
Okay, so if you were like talking to a young artist um that wants to do the blues but doesn't really know where to start, what would you tell them?
Look inside yourself. Blues is a feeling. It's a language all of its own. And it has a lot of honesty about it because it's interpreting life experiences, feelings in quite a particular way, sometimes in code. Um, and I think to be able to perform blues, you have to start getting in touch with who you are inside. It gets pretty deep sometimes, even though you don't realize it. Um, and there's an honesty to it. You can see some of the rock bands um, will take a blues element and make it into something that's their own. But it might just be a pop song rather than a real rhythm and blues song. And
So
there's a whole sorry, go
no,
ahead.
I was just going to say, is there like, if they were to start, is there a classic musician maybe they should study to listen to the sound, or just not?
That depends if they're going to be an instrumentalist and a vocalist or just a vocalist. Um, Blues lyrics are important because they sometimes don't say something directly. They kind of skirt the issue. Um, Muddy Waters had some really great songs. Yeah, there was a lyric in, I can't remember the title of the song, but it was um, the boys don't know, but the little girls, they understand. And it was sort of a push at a romance or a secret romance, perhaps. And there's a lot of mysterious, rather lovely elements to some of the traditional blues vocals. It's a wonderful genre to study. It really is, and it's um, Willie Dixon used to say the blues is the root, the rest is the fruit, and because
Well,
so much of popular
if
music is built on it.
yes, that's very true. That's very true. Um, so you teach master classes in recording.
Mhm.
And so what is the most important thing for me as a young artist, not me as a young artist, but a person as a young artist? I'm an older artist. But what is the most important thing for them to look for in a recording studio? And does it matter the equipment? Does it matter if it's not the newest equipment? I mean, what are they supposed to look for to make it the best sound for them?
That's a good question. We've come such a long way technically, um, and yet sometimes I listen to new recordings and find them a little sterile. Um, I think it depends on whether you want to be an artist or whether you want to be a recording engineer and a producer. Those are two very different paths. For an artist looking to make recordings today, um, I've been in sessions with uh, younger rock musicians who have just given 10 takes of a guitar solo and said to the engineer, just go ahead and choose which ones you think are the best. And that's a lazy way to do some recording, in my opinion. I come from the analog world where you had limited storage ability on a tape recorder. And if you were going to do a guitar solo, you'd better know what you're doing because you probably only had 2 tracks to work with. And there's such a lot of detail that goes into making really great recordings. There has to be an honesty about it. I see some young musicians using the technology as a band-aid, and the great recordings are when the musicians are really in touch with what's going on inside, and they're not afraid to let that out. The studios, as you know, can be a very intimidating environment because you've got 2 guys, a producer and an engineer, sitting through a glass wall, and you can't hear them, which is quite intimidating.
That is so true.
You just don't know what they're saying about you.
And they have every advantage. They push the button and they can talk to you, but then they silence you.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. There's a recording console that's made by solid state logic, and they're very high-end consoles, but their talkback system has a lock in it so that you can keep the communication open without having to keep pressing the button. Well, that's a two-edged sword because you may have some guys in the control room that are criticizing what the singer or the musicians have just done, and they forgot to take the latch off the
Yes.
But
I've always wondered what they say in there. That's true.
that's for them to know and you to wonder about. But
Okay. So is it okay? Keep on going.
no. The studio can be a very intimidating environment for young musicians, certainly, because you don't have the audience feedback. You just have these guys through the glass who are sort of the judge and jury, if you like. When I'm producing a record, I actually like to be in the room with the musicians so that I can have direct communication with them and not be going through a talkback. I'll talk to them right then and there, and we discuss it. And I think that's a very healthy way to do that. But the studio can be a very intimidating environment until you get used to it. And
Yeah, there was one studio that I recorded at recently, and I had not worked with these engineers before. And I felt like, because I was used to Chuck Foley out at UNLV always telling me things, and I couldn't get them to instruct me or to give me feedback. I really wanted that because I wanted to have the best recording I possibly could. Do you think it is better for the artist to ask for feedback? And I mean, are they a producer that doesn't give it to you? Does that mean they're afraid to hurt your feelings, or is that the better move, or what?
Well, let's separate church and state here. So there are 2 roles here. There's the engineer, whose job is to faithfully record and document what's going on in the studio, i.e. your vocals. And then there's the producer, who is sort of the in-between the engineer and the artist, who hopefully has the vision and has to speak the truth to the artist. And that takes a certain type of relationship, and there has to be a trust between the artist and the guy who's producing, so that can happen. And when that relationship has been established and it's comfortable, it's amazing what gets done. If guys are not communicating with an artist in the studio who's separated by a wall and a glass and a pair of headphones, it can be a very difficult environment for the singer or the musician to be creative and really deliver a great performance. There's a big trust factor there, and it's really important that you establish those boundaries, or the landscape where you're going to work and where you're going to perform, because that's the only audience that you as a singer have. Those two guys and maybe an assistant who are
Right.
in the control room. So you've got to sing to them and you've got to trust them. And it's a relationship. It has to be developed and it has to be comfortable. And if you're sitting in the studio not getting feedback, then something's wrong there.
Okay.
Um,
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. And I didn't want to record there again just because I wasn't getting any help and it was just all on me. And I didn't want it to be all on me because I want to be the best.
there's a wonderful video that you should try to find. It's of Celine Dion and Sir George Martin. And I don't know what the occasion was or what the recording was about. I forget what it was, but he is standing 3 feet away from her, looking at her, having her, he's using some hand motions and some body language to get the emotion out of her so that she's singing to him. She's in
Ah.
love with him. It's a fantastic piece if you can find it. It's absolutely a masterclass in how a producer and a singer should work together if they have that trust relationship. And those two obviously did. It's a
Oh.
magnificent piece to see. If I can find it, I will absolutely forward it to you because it's a masterclass in how that should happen.
Oh, and I appreciate that, and I am glad to hear that because I want that as a musician. I want, like I said, I want to be the best I can be, and
Yeah.
so I love criticism. I'll take whatever just to make it the best, you know.
Yeah, as long as it's constructive criticism. And the artist producer relationship is a very it's a very sophisticated relationship because there has to be an incredible trust there and an incredible respect from both sides. Um, and that they want to work together and that they feel that this is the right person for the job. And again, we go back to the adage of you don't matter, I don't matter, you don't matter, the song matters. We're there to serve the song. So how are we going to deliver that? That's the objective. We're there to serve the song.
That's great. Great knowledge. When you're teaching your classes in Chicago, um, on recording, what is like the number one thing that you want to get across to your students and have them walk away from your classes knowing?
Use your ears. I teach, I sometimes teach a digital class, but the class that I'm teaching a lot right now is an analog class. So it's tape based. And when you're recording in the analog world, there are no deferred decisions. When we're in Pro Tools, we can do 100 tracks of something and make the decision later. In the analog world, there's a limited storage capacity, so you have to plan your track layout, and you have to insist on the best performance that an artist can give you as a producer. So I lost my train of thought for a minute there. Analog is
Well, I'm
very demanding. It's very demanding. You have to get it right. And I think that the young engineers that have a background from an early stage working in the analog world become much better recording engineers and producers when they're in the Pro Tools world or Logic world, something like that, because analog gets to the essence of everything. You only have X number of tracks. You have to insist on A, good sonics, B, good discipline, and C, the producer is going to ask the performer to give their best. You don't have a lot of tracks that you can just do 10 different vocals and then comp them later. You might have 2 or 3 tracks.
Yeah, back to Sinatra, I know that he used to, like, they called him one track Sinatra, and he
Yeah.
always thought your very first one that you'd laid down was the freshest and the best. Do you agree with that oftentimes it is your best?
It depends on the vocalist or the musician. Um, Al Schmidt, who was Sinatra's engineer for many years, was a friend. And he said Frank was amazing. He would only sometimes only give you one track because he felt that he'd given the performance that personified that particular song.
Yeah.
But you know, the studio for young singers and young musicians, the studio can be very intimidating. So you have to get beyond that intimidation and go, I own this space now. I'm going to give this my all because I'm playing to this record. I don't have an audience in front of me. I have 2 or 3 guys in the control room and someone who insists on ordering sushi every half hour. And um, I
Or
need,
Firebird sandwiches.
yes, right. So, yeah, I have to get myself headspace into um, there's an audience out there and I'm singing to them or I'm singing to one human being, which is why I think it's important that the producer is there with the singer and he or she can look at that person and sing to them and make it very personal. And that translates in the track. That comes out through the speakers. It really does.
You know, I'm getting excited at the thought of that because I think that just sounds great. And I hope someone who's listening that wants to get into this field, I know that they have learned some wonderful things from you today. And the bad thing is I would love to keep on talking. And we could do a 2-part series, but I don't know if you've got that much time.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. If you wanted to do that, I'd be happy to make this part 1 and we'll do a part 2.
Okay. And okay, so that sounds great. But I can come up with some more questions, but I tell you that that is very interesting to me. What what you I love the idea of the producer being in the same space as the artist, and I can see how that would matter. And I am going to look for that recording with Celine. She's fabulous, and when she sings, it is her whole heart and soul. And I think that's why so many people can connect with her.
Yes.
So with the blues, um, would you say, and you may have answered this, but would you say that I know you said the most important thing is the story, is the song. Is it more important the guitar just is the soul of it
I'm
or
sorry.
the
You just
musician's voice?
you just broke up.
I cut out.
Yeah, say that again.
Okay. So we talked about that on blues, that the song, the song matters, the lyric matters. But with the guitar versus a vocalist,
Mhm.
in your classic blues or your blues that you want to produce, which is more important of those 2 factors? The guitarist and the jam that he can do with that song, or the vocalist, or is there a way to make it distinctive like that and choose?
Well, if the vocalist is the soloist, then his solo becomes an extension of his vocal. So he's interpreting his vocal instrumentally. If the and to some degree the if the guitarist is not the vocalist, he is picking a solo that will support the vocal in some way, or should. So there has to
Mhm.
be an emotional ratification, both in the vocal and from the guitar solo, or the piano solo, or the B3 solo, or a harmonica solo. It's a conversation. It's a musical conversation, and they have to support the theme of the song. You're not going to play a happy guitar solo if the song's just downright sad. So you have to be careful about that. And experienced players usually know how to tap into that part of their psyche and their ability to deliver something that's supportive.
That's excellent. And then the theme of my show is to never give up. And so is there some kind of advice that you have to give to somebody that's either an artist or a producer or recording engineer in that regard?
Become really good at what you do, and believe in your ability, and always look to learn something. Music's that wonderful vocation that we have, where we learn something every day. We learn about a human being. We learn about a musical structure. We learn how to deliver a song a different way from the one that we heard last week. You can populate recordings with so many different elements that make the recording special. And even if it's a cover of another song, you can almost make that song its own, version 2 or whatever it is. It's a never-ending cascade of learning. You have to be open to learn, and be willing to try. And you have to make it personal. You're not going to make everybody on the planet happy with what you've decided to do. I think the most important thing is that you ratify it emotionally yourself and believe in it. And when you do that, you're able to deliver it to an audience in a very meaningful way that they will attach to and go, yeah, that's cool.
And you know what? It couldn't have been said better. And we're going to end this show with that beautiful advice. Thank you so much, Michael Freeman. And thank you so much for coming on the show and for your beautiful words of wisdom.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. I was delighted when you asked me to join you on the show, and be happy to do it again anytime.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
You have been listening to Darla Z, live from the Hollywood Room on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio. Be sure to check out all our shows and download our app at www.bootleggersmusicgroup.com. The Bootleggers Music Group is dedicated to bringing you uplifting, educational, and inspiring shows for the love of God, one tune, and one show at a time. Be sure to visit Darla Z at www.darlaz.com to learn more about your award-winning host. Thanks for listening to or watching the Bootleggers Music Group Radio. Executive producer, Paul E. Jones.